Imagine waking up with a terrible migraine. You go to the medicine cabinet only to find that you have no pain reliever at all, and you go to the grocery store to pick up some Tylenol. Amongst the hundreds of pill bottles and drugs, you pick up your Tylenol, go to the register, check out, take the recommended dose, and within a few hours you feel much better. How did that medication get to that shelf? How did it become so easily accessible to you? How do you know it's not going to kill you and it's going to do what it says it's going to do? Today I'm going to talk about how a pharmaceutical becomes public and is created. Before I do that though, I'm going to talk about my audience analysis and the questions and the answers I received. The first question I asked was, how many years do you think it takes for a pharmaceutical to be created? One of the answers I got was 12 years, which was pretty correct. The other two I got was that someone didn't have any idea, and the other one was that it took a number of years. The second question I got was, do you think that drugs on the market today that are FDA approved go through enough rigorous testing? The answers were unanimous. They all thought that because of all the drug recalls we hear about in the media, drugs aren't rigorously tested enough and that they probably should be tested more. A drug starts in something called preclinical testing, and that starts with something called discovery. Discovery can happen one of two ways, or both, I suppose. Either we find a new technology that helps drugs become more easily created, or a drug that we've been wanting to create is now available to be created, or we find out that a certain drug works really well on a disease that we're trying to fight. According to an article titled The FDA's Drug Review Process, Ensuring Drugs Are Safe and Effective from the FDA website, there's something called a sponsor, and basically a sponsor, and I'm going to use this word a lot, is a company or research institution that is willing to put its neck on the line to create a brand new drug. During drug development, many compounds are tested. According to the U.S. government article, Learn How Drugs Devices Get Approved at patientnetwork.fda.gov, you can have thousands of compounds being tested, but only a very small amount actually make it into the actual medicine. So during drug development, things like how quickly the drug is going to be absorbed into the human body are tested, or more like extrapolated. Drug dosage is measured out, how old someone needs to be to take this drug. Do they need to specifically be a boy or girl? Does this drug interact with other drugs really badly? But it's very important to a sponsor if the drug is more effective than what's on the market today. If a drug is less effective than what other people can get, no one's going to use it. So they need to make sure that it's more powerful than what's out there. The last stage of preclinical testing is actually the preclinical research, and there's two different kinds. There's in vitro and in vivo. In vitro is when a cell, a living organism cell, is tested with the drug in a test tube. And in vivo is animal testing, which I'm sure you can imagine the FDA is very strict on, and they do not believe at all in any animal abuse, so that doesn't really happen. At this point, if the results from these tests are really bad, researchers can decide to go right back to the drawing board and choose different medications or compounds, or just scrap the whole thing. Or researchers, if the test reviews are positive, they can actually go on. And what they do next is something called an IND application. And in this application, they talk about the results they got from the in vitro or animal testing, research that they did, what sort of facilities they're going to be manufacturing this drug in, which ends up being very important later, and who the sponsor actually is, what makes them qualified to develop this drug. Are they Joe Schmo on the street, or are they a really famous company that has a lot of money and really cool researchers that can do the work really well? They also plan for trials at this point, and trials come with clinical testing, and they're with humans, and they talk about how many people they want to use for each phase. There's 3 phases, and how long each of those phases is going to be. There's a review meeting after this with the FDA and several specialists like chemists, microbiologists, pharmacologists, medical officers, all kinds of people with tons of degrees, look over the application, look over the current testing and the work that's been done, and decide if it's too dangerous for humans or not. Then we go on to something called clinical testing, and like I said before, there are 3 phases. The first phase lasts about half a year, and all of the participants, there's about 20 to 100, are very healthy in their average. They don't have to have the disease or condition that we're seeking to treat. Right at this moment in this phase, we're focusing on safety and dosage use. We want to see if it's going to hurt anyone before we apply it to a lot of people. About 70% of all drugs make it past phase 1. Phase 2 takes about 2 years, and all the volunteers have the disease or condition that we're trying to treat. About 33% of all drugs make it past this phase, and the amount of participants is in the hundreds. They try to use a little bit more this time just to, feel out the waters. The last phase, which is phase 3, takes about 4 years, and only 25% of all drugs make it through this phase. Again, everyone who volunteers has a disease or condition, and again, it's just to see how it works and side effects that come with it. After this, they submit something called a new drug app, or an NDA, and in this application is extremely extensive. They talk about everything that's been done with the drug up until this point, the discovery, the development, the clinical testing that's been done, the animal testing that's been done, the cell testing that's been done, who's been involved, the researchers, and everything they've wanted from this drug. It's all in here. The labeling that they want to do, the directions that they're going to put on it should be taken by mouth in the morning and at night, 3 times a day, after dinner, that sort of stuff. And if the drug can be abused, should, addicts be watched when taking this drug. And patents. A patent for a new drug basically ensures that other drugs like it with the same chemistry cannot be created until that patent runs out. After this, the FDA reviews the application, and they regather all the specialists that they had before, all the pharmacologists, the microbiologists, the chemists, the medical officers, and they all divvy out parts of the application to go over and make sure it works. They also have statisticians that come in and make sure that all the data and the math and the equations really checks out, because there ends up being a lot of that. This can take 6 to 10 months. And at this time, the FDA also travels to the manufacturing facility that the drugs will be made in, and they have quite a few standards that need to be met before the drug can be made in that facility. Think more like food standards, cleanliness, and then workers have to wear certain, items like hairnets and things like that. If a facility doesn't meet those requirements, then the drug can be put on hold and the facility has to work to meet those requirements. The FDA is not afraid to do that sort of thing. The drug can either be approved, which then it goes to market, or it can fail, and the FDA can say you need to do more human trials and testing, or maybe this drug is just way too dangerous and you just stop. After this, something called safety and monitoring goes into effect, and the FDA, for a number of years, many years after the drug reaches the public market, it basically looks at everything that can possibly happen in any report that's made on that drug. Did someone die? Did it have a weird effect with a drug that they didn't test? They look at everything that could possibly be dangerous. Facility inspections happen at this time at random. They're still making sure that that facility is very clean. And advertisements that you might see on TV or medical journals or anything like that, or radio even, they make sure that all of that is true. Medical advertisements on drugs cannot be false in any way. They all have to be true. In conclusion, drugs never stop getting developed. We've talked about so much, so I have a visual aid to help you guys kind of understand, more what's going on in your mind. So, again, we start with drug development. This is when everything is sort of getting worked out. All the plans are being made, all the math is being done, the chemistry is being done. Then we move on to animal testing, that in vitro and in vivo, like I talked about. The cells in the tube getting tested. We then move on to the IND application, where the sponsor or the researcher decides to put all of their information forth so that they can put it towards humans. It is then reviewed by the FDA. This doesn't have to happen, but the FDA can come in and give some tips on what they think that humans should have to go through to make this a safe drug. We then go through clinical trials. We start out with a very few amount of people, 20 to 80. We then go to 100 to maybe 500. And then we go up into the thousands. This can go up actually into 4,000. It doesn't just stop at 2,000. We then go on to the review meeting. This is when all the specialists meet and they talk about what's up with this drug. Is it okay? The chemists look over all the chemistry behind it. The statisticians look at all the math. Everything is checked. We then go on to the NDA application, which is the big deal. It's huge. It's very tedious, 6 to 10 months to figure this whole thing out. It includes the entire timeline of the drug so far. It includes all the labeling that the sponsor wants to put on the drug. It includes the dosages and the directions and possible abuse. It includes everything. It is then reviewed very thoroughly. And what the FDA looks for is the labeling correct? The labeling has to be correct. And they go to the facility to inspect it to make sure it's clean. This hopefully ends in FDA approval. So, after 2 applications and 2 reviews, which are very tedious, a drug can become public. And the next time you take a Tylenol, a little tiny little pill, try to remember that there's mounds and mounds of money and people and decades of research behind that tiny little pill that will relieve your headache for just a few hours.